You're watching All About Money on HKIBC. I'm your host, Isabel Wong. When cryptocurrency broke into public consciousness in 2013, it quickly became this sexy digital currency that can be used to pay for things from a pizza to a university degree. But today, we'll be talking about the less sexy aspect of crypto, which is the public online ledgers, also known as blockchain. It is essentially the technology for verifying and recording transactions with a network of computers rather than a centralized authority. And the World Economic Forum estimated that 10% of global GDP will be stored on blockchain by 2027. Our guest today manages a firm based in Hong Kong that helps blockchain startups grow globally. And hopefully she can answer some of the questions that we all have about blockchain, which is a topic that no one can actually claim to be an expert yet. Let's bring in Kirsten Roy-Reid, Next Level Consulting Head of Compliance. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, so our question for you today is, like, we've heard terms such as blockchain for marketing, blockchain for even journalism. Yep. So what exactly is blockchain and how does it work when it's applied to sectors other than cryptocurrencies?
Okay, so the first part is, like, what is blockchain? So I'm going to explain things in the way that I've learned about some of this new industry and technology. So to me, the easiest way to explain is blockchain is a type of new technology, and it's evolving very, very quickly. So it is essentially a new type of a database. So at the moment, you've got probably all familiar with Excel or something like that. It's a really, really, really advanced version of Excel. It's not like anything we've seen before. And the concept behind it is very different to other technologies that we see at the moment, where it allows you for people who don't necessarily know each other and don't necessarily trust each other to share and trust a record of events that's recorded digitally or online. So it's very different. In terms of the types of different sectors and the industries that it can be applied to, early on, back in sort of that 2013, 2014 period, even up until about 2017, blockchain has been talked about a lot in terms of the banking sector. However, it can be applied to so many other ways apart from just the banking sector. So, for example, I'm going to talk through a relevant example that I find very fascinating. Could be like medical records. So, for example, I've moved around 4 different countries. My medical records are all over the place. So it would be very useful and a really good sort of a case study to have medical records available in the 4 different countries and be able to use it when I go to the doctor in Hong Kong to say, hey, this is what's happening. So all that information can be stored in a transparent, secure, and also what they call immutable way on the blockchain, so we can access it and we can all have our history from A to B. So that's a good use case.
Right, so commercially, where are the opportunities for blockchain and what challenges are facing this technology?
Commercially, they could be, honestly, everywhere and anywhere. So any use case where you currently have a process where, say, there's an intermediary of some sort and you want to reduce that friction or you want to reduce the cost in a process, you could use blockchain. So honestly, right now, some of the clients, all the projects that we see come through, it could be in any industry. So medical could be government-based, could be voting rights, could be land rights, could be travel insurance, could be just the travel industry in general. There could be any multiple ways. And some of the things that, people who are hearing about the hype of blockchain or, seeing it, talked about in terms of this new technology, will be looking at their own businesses right now and trying to figure out, is there a way I can use blockchain? And that's definitely, what we're seeing a lot of in terms of clients coming through the door is, like, how can I use it? And the FOMO, the fear of missing out quote, which some people may have read about or heard about, is quite high, because everyone knows when you look at companies like, like Kodak or even like BlackBerry, if you don't transform and revolutionize with the technology when it comes in, there is a possibility that you're not going to survive.
So what are some of the questions that your clients ask you?
They will help out. They will ask questions like, is this a business model we can look at? How would you structure it? So one of the concepts behind an ICO or initial coin offering is offering tokens. So you have to have what they call an ecosystem to be able to to have, you know, a reward in that system for people like you and I and an individual investor to be able to, you know, purchase or participate in that ecosystem. So a big element is, you know, the token economy within that ecosystem, and then, you know, they might look for advice in terms of, you know, what kind of advisors, you know, what kind of team do they need on board. They might look at the different types of technology. So you mentioned at the start before blockchain. Blockchain is how I'd describe that as well is, yes, it's a database, but there's many kind of databases that it could exist. So the overall umbrella term that I like to use is DLT, or distributed ledger technology, and blockchain is just one of those options underneath it. They actually call it a protocol. And what's happening at the moment, because the industry is, you know, so new and evolving, that these different blockchains, there's different types of protocol that are happening underneath this. So one thing a client might be looking for is, okay, can you help me identify which type of technology of blockchain will be good for my business? So some businesses might want something that's more, you know, security driven, because they're medical records. Obviously, I don't want everyone to know my medical records. We don't want that getting out. Or some areas like banking systems, obviously, you know, if you're Visa or MasterCard or whoever it may be, the number of transactions that you can put through that blockchain is going to be important to you. So it really depends on what the client's looking for. So we'll help them with all those different aspects, sort of what they call the pre-ICO, and then obviously there's support post-ICO. So once they've completed their project, you know, they want to make sure that their environment and their project succeeds after it's gone live, and that's a very big thing as well that's being you know, presented in the press at the moment, where a lot of projects are starting to fail. Some might be scams, so that's also something to look out for.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of blockchain, which is utilizing the technology to record transactions on a sort of like a public ledger, which ensures more transparency. So can you give us some more specific examples as for how startups or firms use this technology into their...
There's two ways they could do it, and not all blockchain has to be public. I just want to differentiate that because it's a key point. Some blockchains can be private. So at the moment, and there's been stuff in the press recently, Alibaba has developed their own private blockchain. So some companies may choose to do it just to make their own business. They might have a large global business, I don't know, like Coca-Cola, for example, where, you know, they might want to do things more in a more efficient way, so they could put stuff on the blockchain. But in terms of a more public setting, there's sort of two ways, two options people could go through. One is you could be looking for a gap in the market to try and make things more efficiently that has never existed before. So it's a brand new type of, you know, business model to do things. Or the other thing that we're seeing more and more of at the moment, and I think we'll see more of this going forward, is an existing business like Coca-Cola who might want to manage their business more efficiently. So they're like a reverse ICO or an incumbent process that want to use blockchain. So those are the two things, you know, that we are seeing already in the marketplace.
So how is blockchain performing in different markets here in Asia Pacific?
Good question. There's quite a spectrum on this, and a lot of it ties back to regulation, compliance. Also, another key challenge at the moment is around cybersecurity. So I think some people probably like yourself have read, you know, in other newspapers or on the news or wherever that you know, there's been hacking into wallets. Just last week in the US, there was a guy who's trying to sue AT&T because his crypto wallet got hacked on his phone. So there are a lot of challenges around that. And some countries within Asia are more developed than others. So for example, in Korea, there's a lot more adoption there. Like approximately around 40% of the population will have what I call a crypto wallet of some sort. Whereas in Hong Kong at the moment, it's probably only about 2 or 3%.
Why do you think it's the case?
I think Korea's normally, if you take blockchain aside, is normally quite advanced in terms of technology. They're normally quite innovative. So they seem to be more trendsetters. They also very early on had more regulatory guidance on certain key areas and made some changes very quickly. there's kind of in Asia, there's sort of what I would call 3 different levels of environments. So there's ones like Japan where a cryptocurrency is actually technically legal, it's legal tender. There's other places that it's not legal tender. There's some locations where ICOs are banned, like at the moment China bans technically ICOs, although some of the government bodies and so forth have come out saying that yes, blockchain technology has a lot to offer, because it does, but they might be doing more of a wait-and-see approach in terms of how to adopt it, how they want to introduce it, and how they want, you know, people like you and I who might be investing to make sure we're protected as well, because that's another challenge that is going on at the moment within the blockchain industry. So then on the other spectrum, you might have Australia, where they have come out and said, you know, all these ICOs and cryptocurrencies and stuff like that are subject to the anti-money laundering rules and regulations. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's quite a key compliance aspect, and that's a key concern and challenge as well. So there's different spectrums. So there's sort of the yes, it's okay. There's the neutral zone, which is a bit more where Hong Kong and Singapore is at the moment. And then there's the other spectrum where Australia and they are a little bit more advanced in some cases. But there's not a perfect mix. I just want to say that out front.
Right. So actually, does your firm accept cryptocurrencies as a payment form?
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to hear, you know, when we talk to other companies, but it's becoming more popular. Even the Binance CEO came out and said that 90% of their workforce elect to have a form of their payment in cryptocurrency. So it's happening. This technology, I don't think is going away. It's going to keep going, but there's obviously going to be challenges, like you said before and asked about. So.
All right, Kirsten, hold that thought. Kirsten will be staying with us, and still to come on the program, we'll be touching on issues related to adoption and regulations on the blockchain technology next. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the second half of All About Money. Well, National Joint Stock Commercial Bank China Zhejiang Bank has officially become the first ever bank in the country to have issued $66 million of securities through blockchain technology. Alibaba and JD are investing large sums into blockchain, and President Xi calls this technology as a breakthrough technology. But perhaps it is still too early to talk about widespread adoption, profitability, and expertise on this front at this point. So the bigger questions still lie in how this technology is going to be applied to sectors other than cryptocurrencies. Well, still with us is Kirsten Roy-Reid, Next Level Consulting Head of Compliance. Well, Kirsten, in the first half of the show, we talked about general idea of blockchain. But now I would like to talk about China with you. Yep. So do you think China actually has a favorable environment for the growth of blockchain, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's got a favourable environment. I think some of the things that we can read in the newspapers and stuff like that at the moment already prove that. You just mentioned Alibaba just before, and also the securities issuance, which is a really big thing. So it's really good to see those type of things happening, because I do believe, you know, that there is going to be a wider adoption of the blockchain technology, and it has to start from somewhere. So when we start reading about some of these big names doing these things, then I think that's a really good thing. In terms of the favourable, you know, conditions to try and make that happen, I mean, it's the same with a lot of things. You know, there has to be open communication. So at some point, those companies would have been speaking to their regulators about, you know, what they plan to do, how they plan to do it, the controls behind it, the governance behind it, the cybersecurity issues behind it as well. So there's obviously, you know, there is that backbone there to be able to make that happen, which is really good to see. And then once the rest of the world starts seeing these things happen more and more, I think we'll get to the point where wider adoption does happen. I hope so anyway.
Yes. So blockchain is obviously developed under the idea of transparency, getting more transparency. So do you see the regulations and restrictions of countries in this part of the world being a hindrance to the growth of the technology?
It depends on where you are. India came out saying flat out, no, it's all banned. Other locations have said, and I touched on it a little bit before, where virtual currencies is legal, but have said other things are banned. Some locations, and I'm going to talk about Japan again for a little bit of a second, where they've recently had quite a few cybersecurity type hacks. So the regulators in that instance have got more actively involved in terms of going, hey guys, what's happening? This is not good. This is not good for, our country in terms of reputation. It's not good for the individual that's potentially lost money, and it's not good for the company as well. That's, that did come out and pay a lot of people back when they lost, when everything was hacked. So there's various levels where regulators can get involved, but there's a fine line between having innovation and being able to do those things. And in some places, like I've seen in the US recently, where they're setting up their own industry bodies and associations to try and openly talk together and one another and define, okay, what are our standards? Where should we be operating and how should we be doing this? And then how do we also communicate to the regulators and the government bodies to make sure it's, it's adopted in a well and controlled way? Because none of us want to get hurt out of this at the end of the day. Some people might not fully understand what blockchain technology is, might go and invest in it and then lose a lot of money. So I certainly wouldn't recommend to my grandparents to go and buy Bitcoin or anything like that. So there is a balance, but China does seem to be coming out with some really interesting initiatives. I read, I think recently, that Alibaba put in like 25% of the blockchain patents last year, which is huge. That's big. So what their bigger plans are, I'm going to be very interested to see how that develops over time. So yeah.
So in some of the commercial cities in China, like Shanghai and Guangzhou, they claimed they have policies actively encouraging the growth of blockchain, and in Hangzhou they even put investments as much as 10 billion yuan into the technologies. But by policies that encourage the growth of blockchain, what does that mean?
It could mean that they're putting money into incubators, so you might have small people, like small companies starting up, like 2 or 3 people, and then they obviously need investment and help to get to a certain point, and they might need experience from people who have set up business before, so they might need advice. So there'll be probably, and I haven't looked into it in that much detail, but there should be an infrastructure there to be able to allow that to grow in terms of money and also in terms of experience. Because not everyone, some of these technology developers, and I don't want to offend any of them in any way, they're very, very smart at the coding type stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the business development and the application and the actual implementation of the idea takes off. So that's where I would hope some of that money, those figures that you just talked about, is going towards trying to develop that. And there are some places, and I think some of those locations you've just mentioned, where there's hubs where that can happen as well, which is what I think they're probably trying to develop as well.
So what other factors that might hinder the growth of blockchain? Do you think trade tensions or Brexit could be the factors?
Not so much Brexit, trade tensions possibly. There's obviously a little bit of tension at the moment between the US, and that has a knock-on impact to other things like FX rates, which could potentially impact cryptocurrency type scenarios as well. So, I mean, I don't know how much, if anyone listening or watching follows cryptocurrency prices, but they have actually decreased quite a bit recently. So there is discussion that some of that has happened on the back of like the Turkish lira dropping quite a lot, which has come some of it from the US trade tensions. So there's a whole knock-on impact that I think everyone at the moment is actually trying to understand, because it's such a developing technology and a developing industry. The correlations between these things are being understood at the moment. And some of them, to be able to study and understand them, you have to have the data, and because it's so new, it's actually quite hard to get that data to work out all the the mathematical calculations that may be needed. So there probably is a knock-on impact, but those hubs that they may be starting to set up, over time, sometimes you just got to forget about what everyone else is doing and focusing on, you know, what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and what your dream and vision is around this. And that's where a lot of the, you know, the passion comes into it in terms of the blockchain industry.
I would like to talk about an interesting phenomenon that only it's happening in China this year. So because there's been an explosion of companies with blockchain, the phrase blockchain names registered in their company names, it's almost actually sixfold the number for the whole of last year, to be exact.
Yeah.
But right now there are more than 4,000 such firms in China, and that actually that is essentially a deja vu moment for us of the internet bubble in the late 1990s. So what's your take on this?
I mean, they do say this blockchain explosion, or whatever you want to call it, is very similar to the internet 20 years ago. And I have read a little bit about the parallels. And you know, wherever people, there's a lot of people out there that want to make a lot of money. So having the word blockchain might achieve that. But I think down the line, and I think we're starting to see this a little bit now, where once you have this investment and you really have to be able to deliver something at the end of the day. So not all of them are going to succeed, unfortunately, and that's just a fact of life. So the explosion around the blockchain name, I mean, we will see. I don't know. At some point it's going to, you know, it's like a standard bell curve. You see it going up, at some point it's probably going to come back down, and then it's going to normalise. Right. So which point in time we are at right now, I think we're still at that very early stage, because you mentioned before adoption. Adoption is happening in slower and faster rates in some countries. So the work that's going on in China and the initiatives going on in China, if you compare that to Korea, and then if you compare that to Hong Kong, where at the moment right now is a lot lower. So we will see. It will be, I'd love to fast forward the clock in a year or two's time to see where we're at.
So Kirsten, I have a question for you as a female leader in this industry, because you used to be a woman in finance, and now you're a woman in tech. And we know that it's so hard to find a female leader figure to talk about blockchain these days, because we have conferences dominated by male figures. So how does it feel to you?
Sometimes it is quite hard, I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit daunting when you go to conferences and you look around and there's very few females. But at the same time, that gives you an opportunity to differentiate yourself. So I don't let it, you know, set me back or anything like that. I see that as a way, okay, I've got, you know, something different to bring to the table. People, and then as soon as you start talking and they go, oh, you actually do know what you're talking about. and with my background in finance, which is also, you know, is compliance related as well, I have something different to bring to the table that other people that are more technology focused. So when people see that, you are looked at a little bit differently, but it's sometimes not easy when you walk into the room and it's all guys, especially when they're talking technology and they're looking and talking about the nitty-gritty of stuff, and it's like, I can't talk in that same way, but I understand the concepts, I understand where it's going, and I know regulation is going to be key. So, but it's an opportunity, like I said, and I'd like to encourage more females. So, and that is also a challenge at the moment, is getting more people to come into the industry as well.
So very quickly, what do you think blockchain will revolutionize?
There's so many things it's going to revolutionise. I hope it's going to help the payment banking system, because it frustrates me when and this is a real example, I'm not making it up, where it took me 6 weeks to move some money, US dollars, from Hong Kong to India. That was a very frustrating process that I never want to go through again. So I really do hope that it helps people who do need to send money back, whether it's to support families and stuff like that it becomes cheaper and more efficient way to do it. So that would be a key area.
Kirsten, thank you very much for joining us today. That was Kirsten Roy-Reid, Next Level Consulting Head of Compliance. This is it from this edition of All About Money. We'll be back with more insights from financial expert right here on HKIBC again at 8:30 p.m. next Sunday. Good night.